We're going to look into my top 5 must-have plugins for sound design. Let's get straight into it. So my first one might come as a bit of a surprise to you, but it's going to be Serum. The reason I'm picking Serum is because of the effects tab. There's literally so much going on. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different audio effects you can add to your bass. So you can pretty much get any sound you want without needing any external plugins. So before you go diving into picking an external plugin to add to your process, think before you do anything else. Could I just add one of these to it and make the sound better? So let's look at this lead, for example. Now this is one of my leads that's in my sample packs. And look on the left, there's 7 different effects being used on here to create this sound. Now that sound sounds pretty much finished to me. I'd probably only add a little bit of reverb and maybe some more saturation or distortion to it afterwards. But I wouldn't go too over the top because the majority of the sound has been created in Serum. So my second go-to plugin for sound design is OTT by Zerfa, which is free to download. I'll leave a link in the description. Now this is basically a multi-band upward/downward compressor, so you can adjust the lows, the mids and the highs. But normally what I do is I just adjust the depth here, so I'll apply a certain amount of depth and then I'll adjust this time as well. And that can pretty much just change your sound drastically. You can fiddle with these if you want as well, that's also an option. But normally I just add a layer with a bit of depth on to give the sound more fullness. So my next go-to plugin for sound design is Decimort 2. Now there's just something about this plugin which hits differently, and I always seem to be able to find a way to buff up my sound using this plugin, even when I've exhausted all the Serum audio effects. So what I normally do is I pick a preset, for example, action movie, and then you can adjust the settings here. So you can go through and adjust these, the cutoff, the frequency, and then play about until you get something sounding fat. Now my next go-to plugin is of course Trash 2. Now this has recently been discontinued, but I'm sure if you look in the right places you can still get a copy of it. So what I normally do with Trash 2 is I'll use the multi-band setting here, and then I'll adjust these and get the mid-range here and then the high range here. And then I'd multi-band something along these to it and multi-band something along here to it until I get something sounding cool. Now I don't recommend using this sound for like simple sounds, but if you want to try and create more unique, complicated sounds, then I'd try and give this a go and just experiment. If you're just using a basic sound, then leave this plugin alone. There's also some cool other features such as this convolve setting, and you can get some presets as well to load into Trash 2. And experiment with that, but I often find that they're a bit over the top and kind of just ruin the sound, but it is there for experimentation purposes. Now my fifth and final plugin, which is another free one that I love, is Camel Crusher, and this just adds some distortion, some compression to your sound. So I like to use normally the British Clean. This is my favorite preset, just a heads up. So I recommend trying this one out and just experiment with it. So apply the patch and then you can just change these depending on what, or you could turn the compressor off or you could turn the distortion off. Just see what works with your sound. Now I'm just going to mention a bonus plugin, which everyone has if they've got a DAW, and that is EQ. EQ is really essential for making sounds and for separating the sub, for example, from the main bass, and for layering sounds as well. So if you want like a mid-range bass and then a high-range bass and you want to combine them together, you could like EQ the mid-range in one bass and the high-range in another bass and then put them together, for example. And then you'd obviously have the sub below that. So just don't forget that you always need to use EQ with your sounds as well. There are some rare occasions where the sound is just too good and you don't need to separate the sub and the bass, but most of the time you need to separate the sub. So that is my top 5 sound design plugins for 2023. If you want to learn more about music production, there's a cheat sheet in the description, and I've got samples on my website as well. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.